Many Whigs, sorry Kara at home, I forgot to start taping about 6 minutes ago, just say. Many Whigs did not want to vote because they wanted spots. Where did this war start? Did it start on American soil? Did it start on Mexican soil? In fact, there was one congressman who was actually in Congress for 2 years. He was in Congress, he was elected in 1844 and lost in 1846, and his nickname became Spotty. You know what his last name was? Lincoln. Spotty Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was one of the Whigs who demanded to know where exactly this war started because it seemed like we were baiting Mexico into war. He became known as Spotty Lincoln. And this is an example now of where we start actually getting our first anti-war movement. Many Whigs in the North were against the war, including a transcendentalist who wrote about civil disobedience. I say, what? Transcendentalist wrote an essay on civil disobedience. Thoreau did. In fact, Thoreau was in jail, and Ralph Waldo Emerson came to see him. He said, why are you here? You know what Thoreau said back to him? Why aren't you in here? Because he was challenging the notion of this war's moral, moral reasoning. I've always thought you were Northern liberal. So this is now the Whigs taking a stand, and this is about anti-war stuff, but it's also about slavery, right? They're against this war as much for domestic reasons as for foreign reasons. Does that make sense? That cane has made you more liberal. Here in a second, you're going to be for nationalized health care, and you want Michelle Obama to be our next president.
Oh, no. Never. Ever.
Why was she not born in America either?
Chicago, not America.
Did she not go to Harvard? I didn't research her.
All right, let's talk. What's next on your thing?
Congress declares war on Mexico.
Okay, and we've done that. What's next? We can do what? Okay. The war itself, there will be very, very few AP questions about this, and very few historians spend a lot of time on this unless they're military historians. I will tell you, essentially, America wanted three things. Number one was to take California. John Fremont, who was the commander who was in charge of taking California, did take California. And then two generals, one Zachary Taylor, who I've talked about, who came from the north, came down. And then a guy named Winfield Scott. Winfield Scott will actually come in and take Mexico City through Veracruz. And then they're coming in three different directions. This is not going to be an AP exam. I couldn't imagine the three-pronged attack to take the Mexican War. The war lasted 2 years, but it's not like wars where there are pitched battles all day, every day. This war actually had way more people die due to disease. 13,000 Americans died, most of them due to disease, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But the thing I want you to know about this, first of all, Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott both end up becoming political leaders. Taylor actually winning a presidential election as a Whig. But also, this war ends with a Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Do you guys see that is it on your packet? The war itself was limited in the sense that it wasn't a huge war like when we see the Civil War. You're going to see a total war, right? Where massive amounts of land and energy go into this. We're going to have over almost 1 million Americans will die during that war. This war lasted 2 years, and 13,000 Americans died. This was a much smaller war in scope. Yeah.
Where did Zachary Taylor go to attack?
He went through the north, from north going south. Anyway, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was very, very, very pro-American and actually was signed pretty quickly to end the war once it was announced the possibility, so the South could get as much land as possible. The South is actually going to get... Actually, I'll bring this map over here to let you see it better. And we'll see it also on the visuals I'm going to show you. But the South is going to get what we know as Texas today, and also New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and California, and little parts of Colorado. A third of America. This is more land than the Louisiana Purchase was. This added a third. It added 33% land to the United States. And it took half of Mexico's land. The ironic part is how much Americans complain about Mexicans coming into this area because this is American land and how dare they come into this area. Because they were, there first. We also paid Mexico a sum of like $20 million or something, $25 million over some debt issues. But the land exchange is just gigantic. Mexico loses a huge portion of land.
So did they really just sign it just in the war, Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, Mexico was outgunned. I mean, America was not a huge military power, but Mexico hadn't had their independence that long, was a pretty poor country, was not that organized in terms of military. You're going to read about it in Zen tonight. I mean, the war itself was kind of shoddy. And people died of disease mostly because, I mean, it's not like today. In Afghanistan, if you're shot, they get you to a base as soon as possible to start treatment on you. And once they stabilize you, where do they take you, Here. Germany. They get you to Germany pretty quick, right? If you're in the middle of Mexico during this war and you get shot in the leg, getting shot in the leg today is usually not going to be a life-threatening issue. But why could it be then?
Infection.
Because of infection, right? Infection becomes a bigger problem. And that ends up being a bigger issue. The effects of this war, right? The results of this war are actually a little bit bigger. What's the number?
7.
The results of this war are pretty huge. First of all, we're going to have a crap ton of territory to deal with. And what's the question going to end up being? Slave or not slave? In fact, this is going to have to, if you're writing your territory or a slavery territory issue, and you don't mention the Mexican War, I'm going to wonder what you're talking about. This is going to be the start of the next issue, right? We'll be dealing with this with Kansas and Nebraska also, with issue to Dred Scott decision, but what sets it off is the Mexican War and the addition of all this new territory, okay? Another thing is, a lot of the junior officers end up becoming colonels and generals during the Civil War, right? Lee was a junior officer during the Mexican War. Grant was a junior officer during the Mexican War. Burnside was. Jackson was. Johnson was. Pope was. McClellan was not. He was too young. So there were a lot of generals in the Civil War who got to know. By the way, do you think some of these guys fought with each other?
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of times the generals in the Civil War went to college together at West Point and fought together in the Mexican Wars and were friends. It was a particularly weird thing, and we'll get to the Civil War later. Another thing is we have territory stuff, we have training of officers. Another thing is going to be the parties are going to become more defined, right? The Whigs are going to become way more upset about this. And there'll be a larger definition of what is Whig. In the North and South barriers, they'll be moving towards being unable to compromise. The compromise of 1850 is pretty much the last time they'll get to compromise. And after this, it'll be really downhill. Okay, and last thing I want to tell you about is the Wilmot Proviso. There's a congressman named Wilmot from Pennsylvania. And Wilmot suggested, and the House passed twice, the Wilmot Proviso. The Senate killed it twice. And what it said was all land gained from the Mexican War should be free. It should never be slave. Land gained from the Mexican War should be free. You guys already read about this though, right?
Yeah.
Why is it the Senate would kill this, but the House would keep passing it?
Because the House was dominated by Whigs.
Because the northern states have larger populations, so they have more seats in the
Okay,
House.
Michaela was in the middle of saying that. It sounded very Texas of you to interrupt that. Go ahead.
Because the House was dominated by Whigs and the Senate was dominated by Republicans.
Well, Whigs and Republicans are all the time the same thing.
Democrats.
Yeah, but why is it? Well, it's not about Whigs versus Democrat. It's about what versus what.
Slavery versus
North versus South. How can the representation in the House be overwhelmingly against extension of slavery where the Senate was not? You were getting this.
Because the north has larger population.
Because the House was population based, right? And so the North had more representation in the House. What about the Senate?
It's equal.
Yeah, it was based on 2 per state. We'll chalk that up to your time in Kentucky. I talked to your sister. She said she did text her friend this morning to make sure that she was wearing boots before she went. Okay.
So what was the proviso?
The proviso was all land gained from the Mexican War would be free land.
Okay, so it was like an idea.
Well, it was a law. It was passed twice in the House. It just wasn't passed in the Senate. And this sets the stage for all these debates going forward. The Wilmot Proviso sets the stage for what the North believes and what the South believes. And the Wilmot Proviso is on the AP exam a lot, but it's also because it's important, right? The AP exam usually puts really important stuff on the exam, and it's because it sets the stage for the debates that are going to be coming later. Well, Roy? Okay, I want to show you some, if you want to stop that just for 1 second, don't start it yet.